Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a recent wrap-up. I'm actually probably going to have quite a few wrap-up style videos here within the next few weeks. One, I will do, of course, a dedicated new releases wrap-up for some books that came out in June, but some of them came out toward the end of the month, so I just need a little bit more time to finish them up at the time that I'm recording this. And then also, if you saw my 30 books in 30 days, obviously that meant I picked up a lot of books within a short amount of time, and I just haven't had the chance to sit down and talk to a lot of you about a lot of those books. So a lot of the books that you're going to be seeing in these wrap-ups are the ones that I picked up then, as well as ones that I've picked up here in June. So there's a lot to talk about. But anyway, all of that aside, jumping into today's wrap-up, I'm going to start with Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. And this is quite the book. So if you love epic fantasy, and I mean very epic fantasy that feels like historical fiction, I would say pick up Grace of Kings. Not in its writing style or in its story itself, but in a certain storytelling device that is used by Ken Liu. It reminds me of the Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski. So the specific storytelling device that is used is when you follow more perspectives than you can essentially keep track of. You go to so many pieces on this board and you learn about these individuals, you learn about their motivations, you learn about a little bit to do with their lives. And then you almost get what feels like a short story with those characters. And then by the end of it, whatever transpired within that time that you were following that character, that is going to play a role in the larger plot and the actual main characters of the story. If you've read the Witcher series, you can see how that parallels what Andrzej Sapkowski does, because Geralt is the main character of Witcher. However, you follow a random soldier, a random person talking to some royals. You follow nobility as they are bickering and arguing, and whatever they're discussing is going to affect Geralt. So in that way, it reminded me of Witcher, but again, not necessarily in its actual story. Its story is very much rooted in Chinese history, and I think if you are somebody who's very familiar with that, I'm sure you're going to have a lot of adoration for how Ken Liu executes it and his immense amount of knowledge for that time period. I am not somebody who is that familiar with it, but I still really enjoyed seeing how all of this came together. And I felt like another thing that I'm going to parallel to Andrzej Sapkowski, I really loved the way that, I'm going to call them short stories, when you would get these kind of random characters. He had an amazing ability to make me care very much in a very short amount of time for a lot of different characters. And I was really impressed by that. And while I feel like I've mostly sounded very positive about this, I would say the book ultimately ended up being just okay for me, but I am 100% going to be continuing on with the series. I'm still very impressed by it. I still thought it was incredibly epic in scope. And I just actually wish that that first book had been an entire series on its own, because so much happens in that first book. But the main thing that sort of took me away from absolutely loving it is I wish we had spent more time with the characters, and I wish we had spent more time within individual events, because so many things transpire within the story, and there were so many moments that it's like I understood that they were emotional, but I didn't really feel the emotions because I wasn't given enough time to grow attached. Completely switching gears, next up we have Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I have read all three of Emily Henry's really well-known romance contemporary stories. This is the one I'll be talking about today. I'll talk about the other ones in future wrap-ups, but Book Lovers is marketed as enemies to lovers. I would say it's not so much enemies as it is just two people that the first time they met sort of had a first impression that wasn't favorable. But then from there, I would say they basically get along just fine. So if you're somebody who really loves the tension of enemies to lovers, you're not really gonna get that with this. The setup for the story is we follow a young woman who she has had a very difficult life when it comes to essentially raising her younger sister. Their mother passed away when they were both very young, but our main character was old enough to take care of her younger sister, and that's what she did. And she adores her sister. She adores growing up in the big city because that's this attachment that their mother had to the city that now our main character has. So there's a lot to do with just loving your career, loving where you live, loving your family. And there's really not room necessarily for a romance in our main character's life. Her little sister wants to go on a trip with just the two of them, have kind of a gal pal sister trip. And she wants to go to this small town that is in a book that the main character is the agent for. The author of that book, our main character, is their agent. And so the little sister's like, let's go to this small town and have a sister trip. She's like, oh, all right, fine. And they go on this trip, and then what do you know? This other person who our main character kind of knows through work is there, and she met him once, and she's like, I don't like this guy. But then she talks to him a little bit, and like instantly sparks are flying. So I really want to emphasize, it's really not enemies to lovers. However, how Emily Henry kind of dives into the characters, dives into their personal trauma, their sense of loss, the things that make relationships difficult, I actually really liked it. And a big thing that I liked a lot about it is that I think I can connect very much to that feeling of I am attached to this place because of a family member I lost who was attached to this place. I feel that very much. I feel that for the state I live in. I feel that for the city I live in, the house I live in. So I connected to that quite a bit. And I just really enjoyed the story in general. I had a really good time with it. And if you're somebody who likes contemporary romances, I would say give this one a go. I enjoyed it. I quite liked it. After that, we have one of the best books I have ever read. It's nonfiction, and that would be The Girl with Seven Names. This is a story that, well, it's real, so I don't almost feel like it sounds right to call it a story, but this is a book, a memoir, that details a young woman escaping North Korea and her efforts to then get her family out of North Korea. It is incredibly heartbreaking. It's very eye-opening. The resilience of this woman and how clever she has to be, but also the way that she has to conduct herself. She's just an absolutely remarkable person, and it is very emotional to read. Her efforts to try and reconnect with her family, the isolation that she has by being separated from them, her having to navigate her life in a place without her family, she's on her own, and she's in a place where she has to keep her identity a secret. It's, like I said, remarkable. She's a remarkable person. This is a remarkable story. It's a remarkable memoir. I find her incredibly admirable. I can't recommend this enough. I feel like everybody should read this book, at the very least, to just gain a little bit more insight into something that you might not have a whole lot of depth of knowledge about. After that, we have a reread, and that would be Fireborn by Rosaria Munda. So, you know when you love a book and it's one of your favorites, and then you go to reread it and you're like, oh no, what if it doesn't live up to my love? And this was a fear I had a little bit, and then it exceeded my love. I love it even more now. It was so good. So many of you have heard me talk about Fireborn before. I want to add a little bit more to my previous thoughts, I suppose. So the setup for this story is we are following a new regime. They had a very bloody revolution to take out the previous rulers, and now they are trying to establish their new form of government. We follow two main perspectives, Annie and Lee. Annie was somebody who in the former regime would have had nothing. She was a serf. Her family was harmed during that time. She was incredibly mistreated. Her family was mistreated. They endured so much in their lives. So Annie is 100% for this new form of government because it gives her an opportunity to elevate herself and her status. However, there are, as you would expect, some downsides to this new form of government. The other perspective we get would be Lee, and Lee is actually somebody who was a part of the former ruling family, but he ended up surviving the revolution and growing up in an orphanage with Annie. And he has a lot of trauma surrounding the events of that day. However, as he's growing up, as he's becoming friends with Annie, he is realizing the merit of this new form of government. But he also is recognizing how there are some people from how things were before that have advantages in this new form of government. And I just think that the way that that is reflected upon is fantastic. They have something called a metals test, and this time around, I got to see a lot more, very obviously, got to recognize the nods to Plato's Republic. So if you are somebody who really enjoys philosophy, you are going to, I think, appreciate those nods and the way that the discussion around reason versus emotion when it comes to ruling, when it comes to these different groups within a society. I think that the way Rosario Munda does that within the book is absolutely incredible. I tabbed up my book so much of just, this is a great moment. This is a great moment. Not a single tab was for anything negative. It's so good. It's just solidified as being one of the best things I have ever read. And also there's dragons. But you also see how within this new form of government, you see its cracks and its weaknesses. And how that's explored is devastating. It is so good. Thought-provoking. I can't... The first time I read it, I was like not able to stop talking about it for a year. I think I talked about it in most videos that I did after I read it. And now I'm like, oh no, that's going to be me again. Because it was just so good. And I'm about to reread the sequel. And I just know, I remember things happening in the sequel. And I'm just like, oh no, I'm actually scared to reread the sequel. Because I know what's going to happen. And I'm like, can I read it? I feel like I'm going to fall apart and just break into pieces because I'm just scared and I have an even stronger attachment to the characters. And then the third book is going to come out and I don't know if I'm ready, but I am ready. Anyway, so Fireborn, if you haven't read it yet and anything I said sounds good to you, check out Fireborn. It is amazing. After that, we have what I am going to always describe as a warm sunshine hug of a book, and that would be This Vicious Grace. So this story has a very Italian-esque setting. We follow a young woman who is, I believe she's called a Finestra. Her ability is that she has magic that can amplify someone else's magic. However, her issue is that she accidentally is killing people that she is supposed to be amplifying the magic of. Now, she has to learn to master this skill, and she has to find, in their society, her and this individual who she's supposed to amplify the magic of, she is meant to marry this person. The previous marriages have not gone so well. She's killed those people, and she's really nervous about trying to find a new spouse. And you can, understand why the poor girl has killed 3 people at this point. So she needs to master this, though, because there's this threat where every certain amount of years, there will be this onslaught of demonic forces that only her power has the ability to stop. And we're seeing that that time is coming, and she has not mastered her ability yet, and she does not feel she hasn't gotten anywhere close to figuring this out. Within this, now people are wondering, well, maybe she's not the chosen one, essentially, so now there are threats on her life. Some people are like, well, if we kill her, maybe we can find a new chosen, and then that person can save us from the demons. But what if they're wrong and they kill her and then there is no one else? And so there's very real stakes in this story. But our main character, she doesn't want to die. She's like, I think I can figure this out, but also maybe I should just let the assassins get me. But I think I can do this. And then she has people around her that she is now fearful of and wondering if they're going to try and kill her. So she ends up hiring a bodyguard, and she's like, I can't trust anybody but you. And then so you get a super adorable romance in the story. You have the bodyguard trope. You have the sort of kind of enemies. They're not really enemies, but you have like we don't get along at first, and then now we're starting to get along, and sort of like grumpy sunshine. And this book is adorable, and it's silly in its... the relationship development is cute, and fluffy and precious and a great pick-me-up, but the setting is actually really fun, really cool, and like I said, there are stakes. Also, I really liked the friendships that develop in the story. I thought they were really cute. So yeah, if you need a great pick-me-up, if you need a book with just silly banter, I legitimately laughed while reading this book. There were some lines that I found quite funny. I liked the characters. I just really enjoyed it. And the ending, I gotta say, I'm like, I'm really pumped to see when we eventually get a sequel, even though this one just came out, so it's gonna be a while. After that, we have Razorblade Tears. So this takes place in our own world. It's not fantasy. We follow two men who are former criminals. Both of their sons have passed away. They have been murdered. Their sons were actually married to one another, and these two ex-cons did not have great relationships with their sons because they were not accepting, and now that their sons have passed away, they're realizing they would do anything to get them back. And they also will do anything to avenge them. And so now these two ex-cons are coming together to try and figure out who murdered their sons. And there's a lot of really heavy topics addressed in this book, and it also is incredibly violent. It felt like I was watching a movie. The narrator for the audiobook is fantastic, but regardless, this was a very hard-hitting story, and I think the amount of reflecting that you see with these men, it's not easy to follow them because they clearly had a lot of issues, and the people that they have surrounded themselves with throughout their lives also sometimes the way they view things can be, again, very difficult to read. But ultimately, I definitely quite liked this book. I almost feel like liked isn't the right way to put it, but I thought it was very good, and I definitely want to pick up more by this author. That's it for some books that I have picked up recently. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you have picked up as of late. But anyway, I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.